So my name is Debbie Caldwell, and I am the co-chair with John Barry of the Belfast Climate Commission. And a very warm welcome to you today for driving climate action in UK cities and communities. So thanks very much for joining us. Thanks to Ken Bishop for pulling this event together for the React Festival, and to Teresa for organising it and hosting us here in Queens. So thanks very much. So we've got kind of a packed agenda for you today. We're going to start with Andy Goulson, who's going to take us through what's happening in Leeds and just give us a bit of a background to PCAN, and then go to Jamie Brogan in Edinburgh, and then John Barry will cover Belfast. And then we're going to cut back to Alice Owen, who is going to give us an overview of kind of business activity in the PCAN network. And then we'll get Ken to do a Q&A, so that's a general gist of things. So I'm going to hand over now to Andy, who's just going to give you an overview of what's been going on in Leeds. So thanks very much. Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Debbie. Let me just try and share my screen. That doesn't seem to be working. I will talk without slides for a change. So sorry I can't be there in person. Looking forward to coming to Belfast in a couple of weeks' time. But and thank you for the invitation. I'm chair of the Leeds Climate Commission, which was established about 5 or 6 years ago now. And I'm also director of the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission, which is a regional commission. And we, in a couple of days' time, are about to release and launch our regional climate action plan. So I'm going to talk about both of those a little bit, if that's all right. I've got about 10 minutes, I think. So before we do that, I thought I would talk about the broader logic for commissions. We've seen the wave of climate emergency declarations go through local government well, probably it's slowed a little bit now, but I think now 3/4 of local authorities across the UK have declared a climate emergency. And I think everybody now is realizing that it's one thing to set a target, it's another to develop an action plan to deliver on a target, and then there's another still to actually deliver that action plan. And so there are major capacity issues, and also huge requirements to bring people together and pool our efforts and resources in order to deliver on this massive cross-cutting, at times overwhelming agenda. And I suppose that's the basic logic of the Climate Commission, and overlay everything I've just said with the austerity agenda and the impacts on local government, and we have real capacity issues at the local level. And to some extent, the Leeds Commission came out of a recognition of that. In Leeds is the second largest local authority in the UK. So Leeds is a city of nearly 800,000 people. And even in a city of that size, the climate team is pretty small. It's basically, 2 or 3 people in sustainability, and they have a wider range of issues to do with air pollution and sustainability more broadly to look after. And 5 or 6 years ago, we had this conversation along the lines of, well, it's not really fair to leave it to Tom and George, the 2 people involved, to deliver on this massive agenda. Why can we not get the city as a whole together, draw together all of the other actors in the public sector, including the NHS and the universities and the Environment Agency, and in the private sector, including our developers and construction firms and housing companies and business associations and water and energy and transport and all of that. Also with our third sector, with all of our civic and community groups and our pressure groups. And part of the aim of doing that was to share responsibility across the city as a whole, which involves something of a culture change. I mean, I don't think in Leeds it's that pronounced, because I think partnership working is kind of a part of the way the city works anyway. But in other cities I've lived and worked in, where the council still kind of needs to show that it can do things, and it's it's a powerful body. At times at the extreme it can even be monolithic, and the council I think can crowd out other forms of action by being the big dominant force in some of these conversations. So that the culture in Leeds was very much around partnership working anyway, but it did need some confidence and some faith that this would be a better way of working. And one of the main manifestations of that early on was the council seconding the chief sustainability lead for the city, Tom Noland, to the commission, so that they accepted that working through the commission would be a more effective, more efficient, more inclusive way of doing it than trying to do it themselves. So the commission emerged as an independent body linked to the council, and deliberately there as an attempt to kind of extend the capabilities of the council and the reach of the council. And we are linked via the vice chair, or the independent chair is me, and the vice chair is the council lead, the elected councillor with responsibility for this agenda, and also by a commitment to provide an annual report, a kind of progress review back into the city council, so that there's a link into the democratic process that way. And the council in turn committed to formally respond to that annual report on progress towards the climate targets. But then more broadly, we see the role of the Commission as bringing people together and promoting partnership working, as I've said, building a sense of common ownership and shared responsibility of this massive agenda, serving as an independent and trusted voice in the city, and a place for, to a degree, a safe place for tricky conversations, and an opportunity to build some consensus and to, I don't know if this is entirely true all the time, but, stop the posturing, stop the marketing and the lobbying and the grandstanding, and just get together and have a basic conversation about how we go ahead on climate action. And sometimes I think we do that, maybe sometimes we don't. Also to promote inclusive processes, to involve people in the decision and the discussion around climate change, and to work towards fair, legitimate, just outcomes. We as a Commission also committed to be a positive voice, emphasising how climate action can be an opportunity for the city to deliver on its other objectives, especially our social and economic objectives. And we're a Labour council. To be honest, I think the primary objective of many of the councillors is around the social agenda, and around inclusion and equity and poverty reduction and deprivation. So there are some things like fuel poverty where clearly there's an overlap between the climate agenda and that social justice agenda. But there are others where I think, we as a climate group need to remember the just transition elements and focus on the social agenda as a way of keeping politicians on board. Not that they're in any way anti it, it's just that, I think we're not always their top priority. And then, to do other things, the Commission can strengthen the evidence base. So we've prepared a net zero roadmap for the city, for example, and we can inform and guide and support and track progress. And one of the biggest things we did last year, I think, was to say that the city pre-COVID had been decarbonising at a rate of perhaps 4% a year, but that to meet our target of net zero by 2030, we needed to be decarbonising by a rate of more like 11% a year. So while we're doing some good stuff, it's not enough. We need to double or treble our contribution in order to accelerate that rate of change. And that provides a level of transparency and accountability. And, I think it's easy again to set a target, especially in the knowledge it's actually quite hard to measure progress towards that target. And if as a Commission we can shine a light into that space and make sure that councillors, for example, know that people are looking and are going to carry on looking, and that they have to follow through on their commitments, that can be a good thing. Related to that, I think Leeds is a fairly stable Labour city, hopefully. Sorry, that's my opinion probably rather than anything else. But in other contexts where the council is less stable and you have changes of overall control, I think commissions can provide continuity and make sure the climate agenda stays on the agenda rather than being dropped or used as a political football and so on. So the Commission, we have in Leeds 24 commissioners drawn from lots of different sectors, as I said, water, energy, housing, public, private and third sector. And we developed a net zero roadmap to guide the conversation and break this overwhelming challenge down into a series of more specific projects, programs, initiatives. We've also committed to, based on that roadmap, to kind of identify the blockers and say, where are we ready to go now, and where are we not quite ready to go, and what's stopping us, and what can we as a commission do to remove those blockers? And there are a range of them. One of the biggest ones is around finance and investment, and how we stimulate new flows of finance and investment into the climate agenda in the city. And we've had some successes. We were part of a conversation to develop a £100 million retrofit scheme for the council housing stock in the city, and been other things too. But there have been other areas where we've struggled to have such an impact, and aviation and airport expansion is the one that really tested our ability to work in a consensual way. Actually, I think it highlighted the fact that sometimes consensus isn't possible, and that maybe commissions need to accept that and find ways of working around it. And then just quickly to follow up, the Leeds Commission has, in our region, spawned a few other commissions. So there's a Kirklees Climate Commission, there was a Doncaster Commission, a time-limited commission, there is a York Climate Commission, there's a Harrogate Climate Coalition. So there's a few similar initiatives around. But a year ago, we were asked to develop a regional commission, and we launched that in March, and they gave us the target of developing a regional climate action plan in time for the COP. And we just about did it, as anyone involved will know. Came back from the designers last Thursday, and we launched it on Wednesday. And that's been a massively challenging but also inspiring process, in that at the regional scale, Yorkshire's 5.5 million people, so it's the same size of population as Scotland. And the lack of devolution in an English context is a big issue. And we have 22 local authorities all struggling to do something similar, many of which don't have the kind of critical mass of stakeholders that you might need to build a commission. And so by building a regional commission, hopefully we're able to support the authorities that are more challenged, and to enable collaboration across those 22 local authorities and combined authorities. And honestly, we found that many of the businesses and pressure groups and others like working at that regional scale. I think in a way the proliferation of local conversations can be challenging for some of the the network operators, the gas network or transport or housing or water or whatever it might be, and that there's a subsidiarity argument, basically, that a regional conversation is appropriate sometimes and a local conversation is more appropriate, and we need to work out what the appropriate level for climate action is. But for me, the regional scale makes a lot of sense, and I wonder whether that might be the case in other contexts too. But the regional commission has taken off really quickly. We have a range of activities, one of which is to talk to national government more clearly. Local needs, I think there's a big gap, especially in England, between the local and Westminster. I would hope in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, that's not such a massive gap. But when we come together and speak as a region and say, here are 22 authorities, 5.5 million people, we're finding that we can cut through some of that and be able to speak to Department for Transport or to BEIS or to DEFRA or whoever it might be in Westminster much more effectively. And that then brings it back, and then I'll finish, to us deciding what we want to say. So what can we do at the local regional scale, sometimes despite the lack of national policy support? But what are our key policy requests? How do you distill them down and say, this is what we want? Because there's a lot of talk around this a lot of time, but we need to work harder, I think, to turn that into a translatable, deliverable message that civil servants and politicians in Westminster can understand. And a regional commission, I think, it can do that quite effectively, hopefully, as our action plan on Wednesday will hopefully articulate. If you're interested, we can send that action plan around on Wednesday or soon after, and would be really happy to hear from Edinburgh and Belfast and others, and perhaps a broader conversation in Northern Ireland about whether that kind of approach might be useful elsewhere as well. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. I was just going to say, if anyone can't hear, we've got some seats here at the front. If anyone wants to kind of move forward in time for the next presentation, you might hear a bit more from here. Anyway, I should also just add that Andy's been really instrumental in setting up, is it 17 climate commissions that there are now across the UK, Andy?
It's 15 and 2 or 3 more coming, so yeah. 15,
so yeah, so you know, it's and Leeds was the first one, followed by Edinburgh and then Belfast, but it seems to be a massive proliferation now of climate commissions across the UK, which has been a really positive thing in terms of acting as this think tank and strengthening the evidence base on which cities and regions sort of are making their climate action plans. So I'm going to go now to Jamie Brogan from Edinburgh, and he's going to give you just a quick overview of how the Edinburgh Climate Commission got started and what it's doing. I think you'll see that the models are very much kind of like are tailored to each particular place and vary somewhat. So Jamie, over to you.
Yeah, and can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
And I'm just going to do the screen share thing, if that's all right. Is that coming across?
Yep.
Good. Okay, doke. So, I mean, I'm just going to reflect some of what Andy said in terms of the journey of our climate commission and our role in building city partnerships and projects. And if you'll, just to give you a bit of context, I'm at the Edinburgh Climate Change Institute. We're part of the University of Edinburgh, but we're not a traditional sort of research centre. We're very much about bringing together research, policy, innovation, business skills, and we work with businesses, research funders, public bodies, economic development agencies, the whole kind of range there, which kind of reflects both the opportunity of a response to climate as well as the imperative to kind of reduce our climate impact. One of our first contributions, and with thanks to Andy and his team for this, to the journey in Edinburgh, was to produce the net zero carbon roadmap for Edinburgh, which is essentially kind of for the first time gave the city an understanding of the scale and source of its footprint, its emissions profile, and it also looked at the economics of it and the measures for effectiveness. And that if you follow the art of the possible, kind of showed us as a city that we could actually achieve net zero if we could come together in a way that was collective and collaborative and ambitious. I won't go through that, but as we can share these roadmaps with you. But what it told us, the kind of brass tacks, was you're currently emitting 2.5 million tonnes of carbon dioxide into the city per year. You've set yourself a target for carbon neutrality by 2030 against the background of a city that is projected to grow by another 20% or so in the next 10 years. And you need to reduce that footprint to zero over that time. So quite a challenging context into which we launched the Edinburgh Climate Commission to kind of help the city on that journey. So we are, as Andy said, an independent city commission, but we're co-sponsored, and this was a conscious choice of mine, by the City of Edinburgh Council and the Climate Change Institute, or the Centre for Carbon Innovation as we were at the time. And we selected our commissioners, so we didn't advertise, we didn't go out for applications. We targeted key sectors and areas of expertise that we wanted to kind of build a representative commission. And we set ourselves the purpose of, I suppose, challenging, catalysing and convening climate action in the city. That was the role we kind of thought the commission could be most effective in, and bringing together partnerships to reduce the city's carbon footprint and make it a more sustainable economy. The priorities we set ourselves in 2020, and I should say, our commission launched just as we went into the global pandemic, so we've never met in person, which poses its own challenges. But the priorities we set ourselves for 2020 were essentially to shape and support a green economic recovery in Edinburgh, to build city partnerships, and to support and inform the acceleration of city activity. I don't think those priorities have particularly changed. They've moved on. But what you'll probably see in there is that we've consciously chosen as a commission to kind of focus on organisations and the business community rather than doing the public engagement piece. Again, you could argue, whether the commission could be slightly, but that's the role we've chosen to play, partly because of capacity, partly because of where we thought it would create most impact. So, out of that, the first output of the commission was we produced recommendations for a green recovery in Edinburgh. We produced a report, Forward Faster Together, and we have spent an awful lot of time in partnership with the council, working on a draft 2030 climate strategy for Edinburgh, which is essentially how we're going to get from where we are now to net zero by 2030. And that strategy covers the action areas on here. So that's all great, but so we've produced some outputs. But if I can kind of pause for a minute and be a bit more reflective, very simplistically, I see the journey to climate action on whatever level, whether it's a business, whether it's an individual, whether it's a city, as this. You become aware of your climate impact, you start to quantify it, you plan where you can have most impact in kind of reducing your climate impact, and then you take actions, and you take the actions that will be most effective. Sorry, just skip that. What that tends to mean is that I would say this kind of reflects across a lot of our climate activity and the climate activity we see so far across the world, actually. You get a lot of ambition, you get a lot of targets, you get a lot of commitments, and you get a lot of strategies. And the little climate voice in my head, or the collective voice of our climate conscience, kind of says to me, well, isn't that all just a bit blah, blah, blah? So with that in mind, as a commission, we thought, well, what can we do to accelerate action in Edinburgh? And one of the things that we've done is created the Edinburgh Climate Compact. So this is essentially kind of bringing together the kind of most probably the biggest in terms of both their carbon footprint actually and their turnover and their employee numbers organisations in Edinburgh to work together to make shared commitments to accelerate climate action in Edinburgh. So these are some of the partners and the signatories to the Edinburgh Climate Compact. The festival, who are a small organisation but have a huge reach. The NHS, who are a huge organisation who have a huge reach, and other sort of smaller organisations, professional organisations, building companies, finance companies, energy companies, etc., etc. And they made a shared commitment, which we wrote for them, to kind of reduce their own climate impact across their operations, across their transport, across their estate, but also to use their influence and leadership to communicate the importance of tackling climate change and kind of drive that through their various stakeholder groups. So that was great. That's a model we want to roll out into various places. Glasgow have copied it, and we hope to see it replicated elsewhere, and we're happy to share all of that. But the little voice in my head is still going, well, isn't that all a bit blah, blah, blah? So again, ambition, targets, commitments, strategies, and some of the other people we work with in some of those organisations kind of share that. So they want to move us on into this planning and action phase. And I'll just highlight a couple of things that we've done in that context. So that commitment is all great. What we want it to lead to is coordinated action to collaborative projects to measurable impact. And I suppose as part of that, the compact has set up an action group that's now looking at some of the essentially initiatives and projects that are going to make a difference in the practical steps we need to take to get there. But that's thrown back at us as a city. And again, I think this is reflected everywhere we see a need to accelerate climate action. The question of who's responsible for it and has the skills and capacity for coordinating and maintaining that collaboration between partners to work together on projects, for managing and developing those into a sort of project pipeline, and for making a business case for investment in climate projects. Now that's not driving climate action at scale, whether it's for a city or for anywhere else just now, and would welcome a conversation and thoughts around that. We have had some successes. So again, we've now formed a partnership with one of our partners, the Royal Bank of Scotland, to kind of accelerate that journey to climate action. And particularly it's for supporting SMEs to be successful in the transition into a zero carbon economy, because they're so critical to that. They can be drivers of innovation, and they also have they're responsible for something like 40% of the UK's carbon footprint, and that needs to be reduced as well. So that's kind of looking to move organisations into this planning and action phase by helping them to identify priorities, to recognise that there are opportunities here, and ultimately to deliver climate impact, emissions reductions and business benefits. So that's a tangible outcome, a project we're now working on together. We just need a lot more of them. And that's just a kind of whistle-stop tour of some of the things that we are involved in.
Great. Very much, Jamie. That's really interesting what you were saying, and I think we're all guilty of staying in that phase of awareness building and planning and strategies, challenges. Then how do you kind of like sort of translate that into concrete actions and make sure that more resources are going into the sort of action as opposed to just the planning and getting there. So interesting.
And we spend an awful lot of time on quantification, which is important, but sometimes, particularly in the small business sector, they kind of need to very quick steer on where they can have most impact, and that's kind of what our program with the bank is about, getting them to. Yeah,
it's a big challenge, I think. In like here in Belfast, you'd see 97% of businesses are in that SME sector. So actually reaching SMEs, reaching households, that's the real challenge, isn't it? Because we're almost preaching to the converted half the time when we're sort of sitting in rooms like this. So John, I'm going to go on to you now. John's going to give us an overview of the Belfast Climate Commission and just sort of take you through how it started and how the model perhaps differs slightly from the other two models. John, over to you.
Yeah, that's great, Debbie. Thank you very much. I think we should be preaching the perverted as opposed to the converted. The hard to reach is what we should be trying to do, but we have to start where we are. So good afternoon, everybody, and I'm going to give you a quick, very much in the same manner as Andy and Jamie, a kind of whistle-stop tour. I'll pull out some of the highlights of almost coming up now to 2 years of the existence of the Belfast Climate Commission. So hopefully you can hear my voice and see my slides. So that's the context of Belfast in terms of, the reason why really Northern Ireland is a Belfast city region, not just in terms of the city region deal, but actually the entire province really has Belfast as a focus. And that while we're officially the Belfast Climate Commission, it's increasingly, I think, for some of us, certainly Debbie and myself, to see that it really is for across Northern Ireland, but we do need to have more capacity to enable us to do that. And we have had discussions with colleagues in Derry and Strabane and so on about extending out the network. We were officially launched in January 2020, a bit like Jamie Edinburgh. Just as after we launched, we went into lockdown, and we can probably count on, well, probably one hand the amount of physical meetings that we've had. We've certainly had lots of online meetings from then, but I do think it's no doubt about it. I think it's hampered the development, as I think it has, with a lot of initiatives. And I do think we're in a kind of a takeoff stage now in terms of some comments I'll make towards the end about some suggestions where we may go as a commission. Again, these are my own views. I'll finish up on. They haven't been discussed yet amongst the commission. So essentially, as I think Debbie has described us as, we're kind of like a city level think tank in terms of providing the best, evidence based, empirical evidence, particularly around greenhouse gas emission profile, climate action, carbon zero roadmap plan, which I'll briefly scan through in a moment, but also about the importance, and Debbie's very good at this in terms of reminding us of the importance of climate adaptation, particularly around nature-based solutions that, much like the research that one of our colleagues, Candice Howard, did in terms of looking at the almost, I think, 80% now of local councils across the UK have declared climate and ecological emergencies. A smaller proportion have put in place climate action plans, and most of those plans are around decarbonisation, you know, moving away from fossil fuels to renewables, and that's understandable. But I do think we need to balance that with the importance of adaptation, or indeed, as some scholars and policymakers are now talking about, transformative adaptation. So not just adaptation, but in a way, how do we combine perhaps both elements of much more deeper structural changes in the economy as we adapt towards a climate changed world. We have 4 working groups on our commission with, I suppose, different degrees of focus and perhaps energy. I think it's clear to me anyway that the youth and community climate action are probably where most of the energy and a lot of activity has been done. It's not to say that the group that I chair, the Just Transition, hasn't been also active. And I think certainly David Gavican and Claire McKeown, who chair the Business and Finance, have been doing some great work, particularly recently on the whole area that, of course, is now at the top of the agenda over in Glasgow of climate finance. It's not just a global international issue, but also it's very much a local issue. And PCAN, the Place-Based Climate Action Network, particularly with Nick Robbins at its helm, has done an awful lot of work in pushing forward place-based climate finance as an essential part of local climate action. And I know here locally, Claire and David have been doing a lot of work. Many of you in the room perhaps have seen this before. This is probably our big piece of work that we've done, and thanks to Andy and colleagues who put this together. It's it's groundbreaking in the way that it's our first, empirical baseline analysis of where we need to get to as a city. But as I'll point out in a moment, there is a lot more work we need to do in terms of getting the metrics and more data, and particularly out of separate pieces of work that I've been doing, both for the Department for Economy here, but also UK 100. It's clear that the level of granular data that you could have at a GB level is not available to us in Northern Ireland. That's something that needs to be fixed, and I think certainly that's something where academics, clever people than me, should be commissioned and indeed induced, enticed, cajoled into providing this public service. Because for me, certainly my involvement in this project, and I can't speak for Andy or the academics involved in it, for me, this has been a form of public service. I found it tremendously exciting, exhausting at the same time. But there's something around, and this is even prior to the way in which climate has become into the public consciousness as a result of the build up to COP and so on, that there's a real sense of acceleration, but also then there's a kind of a fuzziness about, well, what's the best direction of travel we need to go in. So certainly for me, as for me reflecting as an academic and as a member of the academy, I think there's a responsibility on universities now to be more proactive in, laying out the resources, the people, particularly in cities like Edinburgh or Leeds and Belfast, who do have universities, about, seeing our involvement as academics in this is something of a public service. And that civic purpose of universities, I think, is never more important for me than being involved in this particular piece of research. So, the summary of it's a lot more detail, but the net zero carbon roadmap really comes out the importance of transportation and the modal shift away from the internal combustion engine car, whether that's more active forms of travel, of cycling and walking, electric vehicles, public transportation, but particularly and rather unique amongst probably certainly UK and Irish cities and maybe even European cities, our domestic heating is the major challenge. And because we're so oil dependent and combined with probably some of the most poorly insulated houses, certainly in the UK, it means then that a retrofit program would certainly be something that would deliver many benefits: reduce greenhouse gas emissions, reduce energy poverty, provide jobs, and so on. And certainly that's something that I know we're keen on the Commission to try and get this over the line, and I know there's been a discussion before this meeting on the housing readiness and so forth. I mean, the reality is all of these commissions, whether it's in Edinburgh with Jamie or Leeds with Andy, we have no powers to make anything happen beyond indicating on the best available, empirical evidence in alignment with government targets for net zero by 2050 as disaggregated down to our local city levels. These are the areas that we think those who have the power in government and local government should be investing in. But certainly for me, I think housing is definitely one, followed then by transportation we should be engaging in. What we probably need also is the equivalent of the zero carbon roadmap for climate adaptation, and we have that, of course, in some ways in the city's resilience plans. But I do think there's an awful lot more empirical evidence that we need so that we're able to measure, because what gets measured gets done, to track progress and so on. But we've made a good start. Here's a piece of research that was done by Becky Willis from Lancaster in looking at the 3 city commissions and trying to find out how people involved in those commissions view what's going on. So it's a kind of a very important, it's not navel gazing, it's kind of sense checking what's going on in terms of how, those of us involved in the commission and the work of moving our cities to a climate resilient and low carbon future, what's going on there. And it's kind of obvious in a way what Becky and our team found. There is a gap between different people. I hope you enjoyed looking at the War Memorial. That's where you were. Welcome back. You didn't miss much. I was just talking about some work that we commissioned on the PCAN project. We have this PCAN fund where we're funding, satellite research projects as we go along. And one of these is really interesting that Becky Willis from Lancaster did about, finding out what's going on within councils, within commissions, in terms of people's views, attitudes, blockages, opportunities. And certainly when she came to look at Belfast, and it was a qualitative piece of research based on workshops and interviews, is that this is, in a way, it's nothing bad. It's to be expected. There are differences between particularly, say, officers, councillors, and then people like me, academics, in terms of our understanding of the climate challenge and opportunities. And particularly there was an interesting finding that Becky's team made in terms of the Belfast agenda, in terms of the overarching kind of community plan for the city, whether or not it actually takes into account the climate emergency and climate issues as sufficiently as it should. I would also add that whether or not the Belfast Region City deal actually takes into account climate decarbonisation and adaptation is also a moot issue. And in a way, it's no egregious criticism of the Belfast agenda or the Belfast Region City deal. It's almost like they were developed in a pre-climate world, even though I don't mean it exactly. The climate issue's been here for decades and we've known about it. But I think in terms of political and public consciousness, that some of these plans could ideally either be changed, and if they can't be changed, can the delivery projects, particularly for the Belfast Region City plan, may be repurposed to take into account more adaptation and mitigation demands. We've had our first kind of academic review in some respects of what we've been doing on the commission, and this is an excellent piece of work that came out as PCAN's, the Place-Based Climate Action Network's first edited volume, edited by our colleague Candice Howard and Matthew Lane and Amanda Slevin. And Amanda led on a chapter we wrote in that book. And what's really interesting is that folk listed on, having written this is not just academics like myself and Amanda, but we have Friends of the Earth in there, James Orr, we have Richard McLernan from Belfast City Council. So in a way, I really like this chapter in that it's an example in written form of what the commissions are trying to do. How do we bring civil society, business, stakeholders, academics and city council? And one of the things, again, which is rather unique and has come up at various times, particularly in the community climate action working group, The first issue is, I think, engaging with hard-to-reach communities on the climate agenda. I think how often the climate issue is seen as a middle-class issue, particularly if it's presented in terms of buying electric cars or buying organic and so on. I mean, these are the privilege of those who are well-heeled and affluent, not necessarily for those who are on low income. So there is a working class issue in terms of how do we engage those who are not currently engaged and who see this as either a threat or something that's not for them. And then overlaying that, and I think the working class issue is probably common across all cities, Leeds and Edinburgh included. But we do have a legacy of our conflict here, which we can't ignore. I'm not going to read out all of that. You can read it there yourself. It is about the reflections that we had in this chapter that we wrote in terms of issues to be taken into account. It's not necessarily a problem, but it is something that you perhaps won't find to the same degree in Leeds or Edinburgh or any of the other affiliated commissions that Andy has helped create. Andy being, of course, the granddaddy of climate commissions in the UK. I mean, one sign of, well, hope is not the right word, but to connect the climate agenda, particularly the working class communities, is that last point there, is that the highest proportion of houses that are going to be at risk of flooding as a result of storm surges and sea level rises are in deprived areas, so that the climate issue is not seen as something that's for the woke, guilty, educated middle classes, although of course it is. We have to recognise that that's a constituency that's already there, but actually it's going to be of interest to people on low income. Now, the Commission itself cannot take credit directly for this. This is a piece of work that was commissioned by the Belfast Chamber of Commerce. The CEO of which, Simon Hamilton, is a member of the Commission, and I'd like to think that some of his involvement on the Commission and his own interest in the climate agenda and business helped create this survey that I commented on back in, I think it was September when it came out. And it's a good news story in that businesses, and as Debbie said, I mean, the vast majority of Northern Irish businesses are SMEs, small, firms who perhaps want to do the right thing. There's 90% over regard climate change as an issue, but they often don't have the capacity. They need help and so on. That means to me that the Commission has a role in helping those businesses, helping, business in the community, helping the Chamber of Commerce to, provide that one-stop shop. Help and support for our businesses who are not in any way denying the challenge and the opportunity of moving on, a decarbonised, green, climate resilient future. And I was going to finish hot off the shelf. One of our working groups in the youth working group, we launched the survey that they did a few months ago, the Climate Crisis Youth Survey. And they're just some images from Friday's launch. And just some headline findings of this, just to give you a flavour of the types of things we've been doing on the Commission. And both Debbie and I, we gave the closing remarks on Friday. But it was 1,200 young people surveyed across the city. And in particular, there was a disproportionate amount of quite younger pupils who were surveyed, and high levels of eco-anxiety and concern, which many of us will be aware of if you're reading the news and so on. And particularly, almost a third feeling personally affected by climate change. But despite that level of anxiety, they are very hopeful in the sense that, there you have almost 90% of them saying that it's still time. It's not too late to make a difference in terms of, which I think, is quite a positive. So there's a recognition of how bad things are, and they are feeling the effects personally and psychologically, but they do still feel hopeful that things can be done. Probably less good news for our local politicians, and I'm so glad I'm no longer one, is that, just over a third of the young people surveyed trust local politicians either a little or a lot in relation to information, in comparison to very high levels of trust in scientists. And I'd be interested to see if that's replicated in other cities. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, for our politicians. Or is it in the way that the coronavirus was handled? We need the politicians to be standing beside the epidemiologists and public health experts, or do we get rid of the politicians completely and just have the scientists in a way, which I think is problematic as well. But it's just interesting, this disjuncture between trust in politicians as opposed to trust in scientists. And then what next? And these again, some of my own ideas, some of which I've discussed with with my co-chair Debbie. I definitely think, echoing Jamie, we need more resources. That we are evolving our relationship with the city's commission, between the commission and the Resilience and Sustainability Board. But certainly something that myself and Debbie have on our agenda is to go to our respective chief executives and ask for more structured support, and particularly for me as an academic, to how can we, without asking necessarily the university to give more money and people, although we could welcome those, to align the work that's already going on the university with students, master students, projects, to align that with some of the work that we're doing on the commission, so that we're already getting an extra benefit from work that's going to happen anyway. A big issue, as I mentioned earlier, is data gaps, and we do need more baseline empirical evidence to help us track and monitor change. There's an issue that perhaps we as a commission now, we're coming up to 2 years, do we need to rethink? Debbie and I have spoken about perhaps having an away day or a think-in where we can just reflect upon, is the current composition of the commission the right one? Do we need to rethink about what it is we're focusing on? There's certainly, I know Claire McKeown on council, and certainly Debbie have been working on finance, as I mentioned earlier, but also the housing retrofit and pushing that forward to be under the relevant ministers' noses, to try and get them to move on this in terms of either, whether it's a small scale pilot of retrofitting or indeed on a larger sense. I definitely think something we've probably not been as successful at, not only for reasons of time and energy, is actually meetings with ministers. Myself and Debbie were invited by Minister Mallon to be at an online climate summit event last week, which is fine, but that was more or less a show and tell. What we need to do is to get in front of Minister Murphy in finance, certainly in the Department for Economy and communities, about putting in front of the ministers, well, here's some ideas we have in terms of what you could do with the budget and the objectives you set out, a new decade, new approach, and so on. And then one that I'm personally committed to, and hopefully my fellow commissioners will be supportive, is that we have some very large public sector anchor institutions. The NHS in the city is the biggest in the UK. You've got 3 universities, you've got Belfast Harbour Estate, you've got Belfast City Council. Can we use this community wealth building model, of which the Pecan project has also invested some research in Lancaster, looking at the Preston model there? Well, can we use this to create maybe something that Jamie had mentioned in Edinburgh, of a concorda, of a memorandum between these large public sector organisations, and get them, as Debbie often says, well, what are their climate action plans, but also then to join up their procurement budgets, for example, or their transport plans, to join those up together in terms of helping us meet those net zero targets that we outlined in the report. So I'll leave it there. Thanks for listening.
Thanks very much, John. Great presentation as usual. I think you'll see there that there's a common theme there in terms of these roadmaps, these net zero roadmaps. You've seen that they're being done in all the climate commissions now. And I must say that these have been really instrumental, certainly here in Belfast, for us, for actually putting some numbers on emissions and knowing where our emissions are coming from. We know they're coming from buildings and transport. That's the key areas for us to focus on. So it's that data which is incredibly helpful in making sure that we are led by the evidence. And Jamie, I think it was one of your colleagues in Edinburgh who said to me when I first took the job in May, is use the data to hold their feet to the fire. And I just think that's so true, that the data is going to be really important for us as sort of activists in trying to get change on the ground. John brought up adaptation there, and Andy as well. It's a kind of a key area for us. I mean, as a coastal city, Belfast is really vulnerable to flooding, but also to heat shocks as well. And good to see some movement there. And on adaptation, I spent a lot of time living in Bangladesh and Rwanda, which is really vulnerable to well, Bangladesh certainly to sea level rise. And these guys are way ahead of the UK in terms of their adaptation planning, in terms of their commitment of resources. Bangladesh puts in a certain percentage of its budget every year to climate action. We're really, really committed. They've got their legislation in place, they've got their budget in place, and they are investing in R&D. They've developed all these saline-tolerant rice varieties. They've got fantastic cyclone warning systems now, cyclone shelters all along the seabelt. So you can see in the coastal area where in the 1990s they would have lost over 100,000 people to a cyclone, they're now losing hundreds of people. I mean, it really is a massive success story, and I think we can learn a lot from countries like that. And I personally would like to see a lot more done in Northern Ireland on the adaptation agenda. Climate finance, another big one. We've got our co-chair of our climate finance working group, David Gavahan, sitting there at the back. That's just going to be so crucial in terms of delivering. It's great to see at COP this week the announcement on coal is going to be really transformational, primarily because it is underpinned by a huge financial commitment to help countries like South Africa and Indonesia transition out of coal. So the finance is really critical. So I'm going to go now, Alice, to you. Alice Owen is going to come up and give you your first live presentation on businesses and place-based climate action network activity in that area.
Thanks very much, Debbie. Now, Teresa, you're going to press some magic buttons. I think John, Jamie, Andy, you don't get the pleasure of seeing my slides. Only the people in the room get the chance to see my slides. But I'm worried about going into an endlessly recursive mix where if we show my slides via here to the, it could go. Okay.
Somebody could cut the email address in the background.
Yeah, do you know what? You're just going to have to imagine, Jamie, sorry. And also, Jamie, you should know, while we're on Teams, you probably did this on purpose, but I've been loving what you've been putting in chat because it floats up above whoever's speaking at the time, which has been an added value. Thank you for that. Yeah, indeed. Yeah, thanks very much for that. I have now given myself a virtual heckler. What we're learning about hybrid events. Anyway, I am your first in-person speaker of the day, over from the University of Leeds. I came over on the ferry last night with several hundred very happy Rangers supporters returning from Glasgow. That's a low-carbon experience. I think the other thing I want to say is it's best part of 2 years since I left the Wharfe Valley in Yorkshire, where I live for work. The first place I come is Belfast, and it's very nice of you to lay on the proper Yorkshire weather to make me feel completely at home. So thank you massively for that. I'm going to just run you through the business side or some of the aspects of the business side of work that can be done with local climate commissions. I'm going to talk about what kind of businesses are currently involved in local climate action through local climate commissions. We've got a little bit of data that suggests why they might get involved as well, which I think raises further questions, so I'll share that. And then also, actually, what on earth is local climate action for a business anyway? I'll offer you some thoughts about that. So first up, much of the text on this is too small for you to read, but it's to indicate, just to give the background of what PCAN is about, which we already covered, but the key thing I want you to look at is the table on the right-hand side, which lists core commissions in Edinburgh, Belfast and Leeds, and then a PCAN Plus network. Our friends and relations who have joined the local climate commission party. Now, this the data I'm presented was collected at the end of May, beginning of June. At that point, we had 11 commissions formally constituted in the wider network. You've heard they're now at 15 and rising. So the data that I'm sharing is all on the slightly small side. The other thing I wanted to say as background before getting into the data is, what do we mean by local climate action for businesses anyway? I mean, this onion diagram gives you a whole series of spatial scales to work out: the personal, the local, the regional, and so on. And Andy, in his first talk, kind of made the case for the things that can only seem to be done at regional rather than local level. One of the challenges in getting businesses engaged in local climate action is many businesses are actively involved in supporting individual or personal change through their B2C businesses, through their customer base, and many businesses are involved in national or sectoral action because of the things that affect their sector. Which is all great, but they also have most businesses have a physical location of some point where they have a local impact, which may not be the impact of their products. It may be the impact of their processes, it may be the impact of their site. But one of the challenges in getting businesses engaged in local climate action is framing it in a way that's really, really relevant to them. And we to start off the project that I'm sharing the results from, we had a good look in the academic literature, because that's where you look for your cutting edge information, right? The academic literature. But we had a good look to say, you know, what was there about business climate action at the local level? And the answer is precious little. There is a lot about types of business, SME action. There is a lot about sector action. There's a lot about national action and business as a national stakeholder, but very little about what businesses can do on a local basis. So, as of the middle of this year, what did we have in terms of involvement? In May, at the end of May, we had 61 businesses formally involved in the Place-Based Climate Action Network. 21 of whom, so a third of those businesses, were in the 3 core commissions, and the other 2/3 in that wider network. What I think is interesting is that there is no template, no kind of universal sign that helps you recognise the kind of business that will get involved in local climate action or in a local climate commission. Some sectors are very well represented. You might argue on the basis of their emissions, overrepresented. The top line here is the amount of companies from the professional, scientific and technical services, and we have some of my colleagues from professional consultancy businesses in the room. Actually, direct emissions associated with the professional services is very, very small, 1/3 of 1% in the UK, and yet the businesses the proportion that those businesses make up of UK businesses is about 17%, but 1/3 of the businesses involved in local climate commissions are from that sector. So, and the other big one, the bottom line there is we've got about 1 in 6 of the businesses involved in local climate commissions coming from utilities, from electricity, gas, water, and so on. So there are people involved in local climate action who are involved in large areas of emissions, but actually the motivation for businesses to get involved in local climate commissions might be as much about influence, business development, being part of a policy conversation, as it might be about tackling the direct local emissions. And the kind of flip side of that is that, of course, there are sectors that are underrepresented in terms of being involved in local climate action, most notably agriculture, forestry and fishing, which are significant emitters of climate changing emissions nationally. Obviously, in terms of land management, the often little understood and highly pressured sector, which we are expecting to deliver major emissions reductions from, agriculture, forestry and fishing are key. There's 2 businesses from that sector out of the 61 involved in local climate commissions across the UK. Now, why is that? It's a very good question, because clearly businesses that are directly involved in managing land are by definition local, in a sense that they are managing space, they are managing the areas. Well, I think that says that perhaps the levers that those businesses feel they want to pull, the conversations they want to be part of, are not necessarily the conversations that are happening at the moment in local climate commissions. I think they could be, and I think as the whole contested area of land management gets a bit clearer, we've had several calls for better data to understand where we can make reductions in climate emissions, and I think the area of land management is a particularly difficult one to get a straight story of communication on. We may well see more land managers entering in the fray, and certainly I was involved in the Doncaster Climate Commission, which was time limited, and there the NFU, National Farmers Union, were one of the commission members representing a large number, clearly, of land management businesses, but they were in direct tension with another large land management partner, which was the Yorkshire Wildlife Trusts, who owned similar amounts of land to that managed for agriculture in the Doncaster area, but had very different objectives in managing that land. So I think we have some challenges about getting full business engagement in local climate action here. The other interesting thing to note is manufacturing businesses are quite poorly represented in local climate commissions compared to the responsibility, if you like, that they have for direct climate changing emissions. And I think that comes back to the fact that sector policy is usually national rather than local. The other thing, I think this graph is just meant to show you that certainly looking at the orange bars, which are the kind of businesses involved in commissions overall, the wider network of commissions, you get an awful lot of micro enterprises involved in local climate commissions. And more often than not, these are 1, 2, 3 people businesses who have a mission associated with reducing climate action. They're very, there is no difference between who they are as people and who they are in running their business. So we do see quite a lot of freelancers, communication experts, people like that who want to be involved in local climate action. So we get a large number of very small businesses and a similar number overall of very large businesses. The challenge being that the very large businesses who have a national footprint or even a regional footprint cannot get involved in every local climate commission. Yorkshire Water, who now chair the regional Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission that Andy drives forward, I had a conversation really early on with them after they're actively involved in the Leeds Commission, with them saying, if you're going to have 22 of these local commissions on our patch, we can't do all of them. They have to work out which are the local areas where either the policy framework or something to do with their customer base makes it worthwhile to get involved. And the other little bits of data I wanted to share with you is about why businesses do or don't get involved in local climate action. And these, I realise there's something going on in the background, Teresa. I'll speak over these, including interventions from extraterrestrial life that are happening there. So I realise the kind of individual text below the bars is not readable, but this is, we asked businesses engaged in the network why they were involved, and each of these groups of bars is a different reason. Now, interestingly, I thought the key thing here is that profit was not actually, so reducing costs, increasing profit, was not the main driver. In fact, most people, there was a strong element of disagreement that it was the prior conclusion. Clearly, it's important for business viability, but profit is not, or cost reduction is not the only show in town. Whereas I think recently, until relatively recently, and the eco-efficiency, waste reduction, doing more with less kind of approach to business as sustainability would have meant that was at the top of the list. Secondly, the biggest positive driver of why they got involved in local climate action was about reputation. Because reputation, brand, customer loyalty, trust, all those things are wrapped up together, and they are absolutely vital for business success. So we do have some indicative data saying that actually being seen to take action and engage with your local community is important for reputational benefit, and that's a key driver. Third, there is a strong motivation about managing risk, and perhaps this is the more positive side of business management that isn't just about profit at any cost, but it's about managing risk to make reasonable profit. And all the businesses responded to our survey said that actually we're in the business of risk mitigation. We're about managing risk, and it's about future-proofing our business. So those are kind of some of the motivations. It's not driven by profit, or the eco-efficiency argument is last decade's argument. This is about future-proofing and development, which I think is encouraging and gives us a series of reasons to move forward. The other thing we asked businesses is how often that they actually undertook a whole range of different forms of local climate action. And the key thing to notice is the kind of the bars across this whole spread of potential actions is spread fairly evenly, and there is a much higher rate of businesses taking climate action than I certainly would have thought. So there's a high frequency of climate action. People do things at least once a week or more. And the other thing is that the biggest or the most frequent climate action that businesses pointed to from the list we gave them was around community engagement, which is the fourth bar across on the right from the left-hand side there. And that's, I think, interesting that it comes back to why operate locally when you're part of a sector that's driven by national policies or serving individual customers. And therefore, I think community engagement is something being worthwhile about. Businesses do care about and want to think about their place in the community. I'm just going to flag, David's got a question, but Debbie, if it's all right, I'm going to just finish this, but just to log, David's got a question. We mustn't lose him. And actually, that prompts me very neatly to come to the end. I think so. In conclusion, we have a growing number of businesses. These are not the big emitting businesses necessarily, but they might be the key influencing businesses to what happens at a local level because they are willing to be engaged, because they care about their community, and because they have recognised that becoming active in managing climate impact is an important part of actually mitigating the future risks that their businesses face. So nice for once to have at least some minimal data to kind of sort of suggest areas of inquiry. It was only a small sample size. There's many more questions that we'd like to ask, but hopefully it provides the prompt for further discussion and debate. So thank you very much. I will now, who am I handing back to now? So Ken is now going to take up to deal with any questions that might be forthcoming. And Teresa's going to do some more magic pressing of buttons to bring, magically, Jamie, Andy and John. 3, 2, 1, you're back in the room.
Thank you, Alice, for that. Yeah, this section here, I think we should just open up the floor to some questions. And so if you myself, but we're going to hold the limelight as normal, I'd open up for any questions for. Sorry, David, sorry, you were mentioned earlier on, so.
Alice, on that last slide, if the interventions are weekly or more often, are you able to then see if there's a correlation with improvement? Because it seems to me that if people are making these interventions locally, we should start to see some collective change in the environment. I suppose it's that loop that I'm really interested in, because I think that starts to feed the momentum. Without it, you're sort of left.
Yeah. Not sure of what the audio pickup is in the room, so for the benefit of our virtual participants appearing on your screen, I'm just going to try and capture that, which is there, given that we have some data, I use the term quite loosely, about frequency of action, can we turn that into sort of an evidence of impact, ideally something quantitative, right? And the answer is, with a larger sample size, we might be able to. We absolutely don't have sufficient data to be able to, in enough areas, to be able to say anything meaningful. The other thing is, I think we couched climate action quite loosely. It's not all stuff that reduces direct emissions. So empowering your employees to deliver some carbon literacy training, or to up their recycling rates at home. We kind of said those are climate actions, but not all of the actions we identified would lead to a quantifiable local reduction in emissions. They might over time add up to some changes in habits and behaviours across a community. I'd feel really anxious about claiming causality and the PCAN approach taking credit for that at this stage.
Thank you. Sorry?
Yeah, thank you. It's great to see that, you know, you're looking at the importance of data in relation to driving climate action. Over the last year, there's been 2 reports done, one by the Circularity Gap Initiative that highlights that if the world doubles its circularity, we can reduce global emissions by 39%. The second one was done by the Green Alliance, which highlights that if the UK adopts the circularity approach, that it can create 450,000 jobs by 2030. And I suppose my question is that what focus is PCAN giving to developing a circular economy when it tackles both climate action and also bringing into account social value?
Okay, the question there really was to do about what PCAN is doing to tackle the circular economy,
yeah.
To address the climate as well as social impact.
Yes.
So we open up the floor to any of our colleagues on screen. Andy?
Yeah, I can say circular economy is one of the 50 actions in the forthcoming Yorkshire and Humber Climate Action Plan. We see that there are huge opportunities in there, and one of the biggest ones, I think, is in linking businesses with their consumers and customers, and also in the other direction with their supply chains more broadly. So I agree. I think it's a massive opportunity. I think it's a slightly underexplored one at the regional scale from a climate perspective. But the opportunities are absolutely clearly there, including on the kind of positive side around economic development and the opportunity for new, net zero industrial zones, for example, is something we've been looking at in a Yorkshire context. We know in Leeds we have a district heating scheme, and there are opportunities to add businesses into that, both as suppliers of heat or as consumers of heat. But we also, at the regional scale, have an opportunity around carbon capture and storage, and the opportunity to, potentially attract inward investment from organisations which are, going to find it hard to decarbonise without access to a CCS network. And that creates the opportunity to develop a cluster of organisations that can, feed off each other and that kind of industrial symbiosis stuff that I think is massively exciting from a climate, both mitigation and adaptation perspective. So yeah, I think it's been recognised as a huge issue and as a huge opportunity, but probably not fully elaborated on yet, would be my sense.
Maybe, Jamie, if I could just come in here as well, because early on you mentioned in Edinburgh about the compact and the business membership. Bearing the last question there about what PCAN is doing, yes, addressing climate change, but also measuring that impact on businesses. Have you anything you can share about the experience or the businesses' experience within the compact?
Well, I think businesses recognise that I mean, as Alice was saying, you know, their customers are going to shift, their markets are going to shift, the operating environment is going to shift. There's an expectation on all of their stakeholders, employees, communities, etc., that they need to respond to a low carbon economy, and I think that's driving business change. It'll also drive. I mean, you know, I was having this conversation with the chief executive of the Chamber of Commerce here this morning. Actually, people talk about things like efficiency and resilience and the response to climate change for businesses in kind of separate conversations, and they're not. You know, if you a more climate friendly organization is a more efficient organization, so they save money, and you know, a more resilient business is, climate change is just one aspect of that. So businesses, or at least the businesses that have kind of looked at this more closely, are very definitely seeing, those that have been ahead of the game are very definitely seeing benefits. Those that are still kind of waking up to this are they can definitely see the need to drive change. That really answers your question, but.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Again, just for myself, just the circuit here with you, John. Obviously, you and I have had previous conversations about eco-innovation, new opportunities coming, say, from around Belfast and Northern Ireland. I mean, have you any reflections on, again, using the term used, you know, this is the sort of take-up stage in this transition?
Yes, I mean, you know, we can get terribly depressed, both about this issue in general, but particularly Northern Ireland. We get parochial, sorry, chaps on the other two screens. But actually, there are some good news stories as well. I mean, obviously, for me, it's always 5 years too late and a couple of tons of carbon short, Minister Poots, or other, you know, senses of the urgency. I'm not feeling the urgency, which is always my frustration, but certainly whether it's on electricity, 50% or thereabouts of our electricity was produced by mostly onshore wind. There's a bright future, I think, for the hydrogen economy in Northern Ireland. We've got the, you know, outstanding success of Wrightbus and the link up with TransLink locally. There's also an underexploited resource, although Alice might have something to say on this in terms of, we had a discussion about it, well, it must be over a year ago now, where the repurposing of what would potentially be defunct gas infrastructure, you know, because as we move from coal, oil to gas, and then beyond gas to renewables, what we're going to do with all this gas network if it's now no longer going to be, you know, pumping, you know, natural gas, which of course is a fossil fuel? Well, is it going to be, you know, we use that for hydrogen or biomethane and so on? And so there are issues there that because in Northern Ireland we've been rather late to the game to the extension of gas supplies to domestic and commercial users. Our gas network is extremely new, and therefore it has a higher capacity to take on board more hydrogen. And I think that asset mapping is something that we need to do an awful lot more in terms of saying, well, how can we repurpose existing infrastructure, and not least in terms of, you know, the development at maybe a lower cost of green and blue spaces that we're going to need an awful lot more of across our cities and urban areas. But if I just say one thing about the social value element that I think I picked up from the person who asked the question, I think that's an excellent way of, we have to conjoin the climate science and the need to move on decarbonisation and climate adaptation, but with issues around social justice, in terms of we cannot forget about the inequality agenda. And certainly, again, as part of my passion and interest in the kind of community wealth building model, is this local power that, you know, if you think of those public sector institutions that I outlined in my presentation, they employ thousands of people. They have a combined public procurement budget. At last estimate, was at least over 2 billion. So £2 billion in our local economy. And where is it spending? Where is the NHS, the Belfast Health and Social Care Trust, Queen's, Ulster University, Belfast Met, you know, Belfast Harbour Estate, TransLink, you know, the City Council? I think there's an enormous untapped capacity of conjoining even those procurement budgets to, you know, demand cascading social value, you know, living wage employment, for example, considering chopping up those procurement budgets so that small SME firms can bid for them. And this is exactly what they did in Preston. And I'm not saying as a panacea, it still has its challenges, but there is something to be said about those local innovations that were effectively, just to finish, that we don't need to, while it'd be ideal to have clear signals from central government, and I think we're going to need that, it's always easier, in my view, to ask for forgiveness than permission. I think part of what the experience of the Pecan network is that what we're doing will look very different in Leeds, in Yorkshire, in the Humber, in Edinburgh and in Belfast. And I think there's certainly that sense of innovation that we're only at the beginning stages of, in terms of, I think, an excitement and trying to do something differently. And that's the key issue. You know, we have to have some disruptive, paradigm shifting, you know, innovation, particularly even within how our local public sector works. And for me, there's certainly something to be explored in the repurposing of the public procurement budgets in a much more socially just and as well a climate resilient way.
Thanks, John. Alison.
Just to come back to the circularity point and join up what my colleagues have said there, I think where Pecan has something distinctive to offer is where an increase in circularity coincides with an increase in localisation. Now they don't, and you can increase circularity on a total resource flow without relocalising it, but I think that's where the real improvements come, and that might mean changing source materials to more local sources. It might mean changing your disposal or reuse. So there's something we've got locked into some global resource flows, and I think the combination of circularity and relocalization, which was what John was talking about, is actually where the big gains will come. But we're quite a long way off that conversation in the circular economy debate, which is still largely locked into how these global international resource flows can be made circular rather than how they can be made local, as far as I'm aware. So just
there is some reports out that highlight that in terms of 1,000 tonnes of electronic waste, if you put it to landfill or incineration, it creates 1 job. If you have it recycled, it's 70 jobs. If you have it reduced and repaired, it's 200 jobs. So it's that thing about, as you said, there is this opportunity in terms of looking at the circularity economy and how it can bring local benefits as well. But also picking up on John's point, Northern Ireland, we spend $3 billion a year from, Conor Murphy Finance Department in terms of public procurement. This year, in 2022, we're bringing in 5% in tenders. We'll be looking at social value, but there's nothing that's looking at green public procurement or the circular economy. I think that needs to be looked at and addressed as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, I want to move on to ask another question, but maybe before we move on to that, Alice and I, we first met and had this great big conversation about where the new jobs were coming from. So maybe, Alice, would you just summarise, the 3 or 4 categories? I think it helps to crystallise some of the forming thought and transition. So maybe you might.
Yeah. Just around that, you mean the data there about the job intensity of recycling and reuse and repair and the skill level involved is absolutely win-win-win on climate economic. I think we have significant in the construction sector, and particularly in property maintenance and renovation. There's a lot of, we've already got an army of construction workers maintaining existing buildings, building new buildings, but there is another army needed to turn that into a green transformation of our existing building stock. And I mentioned earlier, I think food, land use, actually making that more labour intensive, not a way of reducing costs, but a way of increasing the skills and sensitivity, is a huge area of potentially high skilled, scientifically enabled, climate friendly jobs.
Thank you, Alice. Any other questions from the floor? Yep, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, this might be just a more psychological question, and it's open to anyone. But just considering, the obvious and undeniable divisions we see within a personal and professional context throughout the world, would you agree that a paradigm shift or focus on more humanistic practices are the key to living sustainably? So, for example, enough of us, especially young people, know what we can do, but how do we show people to do more? And just looking at a little article here just published by The Guardian recently, it says few willing to change lifestyles we see the climate survey finds. And so I was reading through that, and it says that a lot of people aren't acting on climate change for various different reasons, but in tandem to the youth survey that we did a couple of weeks ago as part of the Belfast Climate Commission Youth Working Group, I think a whole magnitude order of young people understand and are acting on it a lot more. So just to kind of summarize, most people agree that we should have stricter environmental, should have more stricter environmental laws. So why don't we find the lowest common denominator for humanistic sustainability focus?
Thank you. That's a really interesting area. For the benefit of colleagues on the screen, let me see if I've picked up your point correctly. So at core, it's that tension between the personal values and what people want to do and what they can do and what they feel able to do, what you call about a more humanistic set of values. Is that the kind of core tension that you mentioned the youth survey saying young people really care about this?
For now, anyway.
Yeah, but then the Guardian article saying yes, people care, but what can they do?
Mm-hmm.
So my immediate response, while I can't read sideways. John may have put all the answers up on the screen. There's a lovely term. Again, I've become an academic, so forgive the jargon, but the idea of cognitive dissonance, the idea that we all know what we need to do, but somehow we keep on doing the things that we've always done, and we just cope with that. We cope with the stress of that. I think one of the things we have to do is make it easier to do what people feel is the right thing. I mean, I mentioned in opening very, as a passing kind of bit of jollity that I came over on the ferry. I drove my EV up to Strathconran and got the ferry over, and had interesting company because that was the choice that I chose to take, and it would have been certainly quicker, and I'm sure I would have mixed with a different class of people if I'd taken the cheap flight. Anyway, so I think we have to do something about making it easier for people to do the right thing, and that has got to be a combination of public sector policy and business offering decisions. So that's where the kind of conversations that happen around the commission tables is really helpful, because they're not competitive conversations. They're about how do we make it easier in our area for people to do that thing. In our city, how do we make it easier for people to buy low impact organic meat and dairy, so they might spend a bit more on it, but they only have it once or twice a week, and they're benefiting local land management jobs. How in our area, how do we help people make the right transport choices? So I think you put your finger on something really important about the challenges we face, and I actually think that local climate commission conversations offer you a way of starting to find those way through. Now, to the Rogues Gallery on the screen, have I given you sufficient time to come up with a slicker way of answering that question?
Go on. Maybe not. Maybe not. What did John say? Did he have anything useful to add to the conversation?
When do I have anything useful to say, Alice? But the point I was just making is that, I do think, and it's not something we really gone into the commission, so what I'm going to say is my own view in terms of my own academic interest is that we have to get serious about the limits to technologically decoupling expanding production from energy, pollution and resource. And it is worrying that even over in Glasgow, as it was in Paris in 2015, there is a danger of policymakers building into their assumptions and their modelling as of yet discovered and at scale feasible forms of negative emissions technologies, for example. And I think we're not really at the conversation stage yet where we are going to have to reduce and, in my view, have a much more collaborative sharing forms of attitudes to at least parts of our consumption mix, not everything. And we're not really at that stage yet. For me, I do think the institution of the library, whether it's a library of things, or we have an example in Belfast, we have a tool library, we have a repair cafe. These are going to be these more locally, innovative forms of extending, obviously, the products that we buy, But I really do caution, and it does drive me to distraction, and has done for 40 years as an academic in this space, these naive wish fulfillments that somehow we can endlessly grow our economy and decouple all of that from energy, resource and pollution. There is no demonstrable empirical evidence that we can do that. And I just say, if you don't believe me, look up the European Environment Bureau's excellent report from 2019 called Decoupling Debunked.
Okay, thank you, John. I'll take one final question if I'm in the audience, but I have to get an opportunity. Brendan. Oh, sorry. You'll come in, Jamie?
Well, I was, yeah. And I mean, Alice answered that question very well, but the transition to a zero carbon economy is going to require us to make changes to behaviours, to choices and to cultures, which the UK's net zero strategy, frankly, completely ducked. At a more local level, the local authorities who we work with who are kind of driving net zero in our local cities are going to make changes that people won't necessarily agree with. And the role of local climate commissions, I think, is to at least kind of help those local authorities to push further than they would be able to without that independent voice supporting them.
Okay, thank you. So last opportunity, any other questions?
Do you think that nationalisation of utilities is something that gives government control in that way and can do something about the climate? For example, James Corbyn to nationalise the railways in England. Would that be something that if you give government that power, you give that control, would they be able to do something rather than those utilities being in private hands, which may just be more
So the question, guys, is whether or not nationalisation of utilities, removing them from the profit motive and putting them into a national and a politically controlled environment, as was proposed by Labour at the last general election, would be. I'm just reframing it accurately. I'm just checking that. Yeah. Okay. I'll be honest that I'm not clear on the evidence for the fact that that makes a difference about the climate impacts of managing the utilities. I would have thought there is a reasonable case in terms of the economic return and the employment return back into areas. I'm putting aside the railways and that, but thinking about the management of the utilities, the flow of resources. I also think, though, that I've spent far too long recently thoroughly immersed in a localized system to be able to answer that question authoritatively. In the US, utilities are managed as public utilities in many cases. I'm not sure that that delivers climate benefits, but it certainly has shown to deliver economic and employment benefits. I wonder, though, if any of our esteemed panel on the screen have actually got anything to add to that.
Go on then, Andy, put me right.
I'm not going to put you right at all, just compliment it. I think maybe it relates back to the circular economy point, because Yorkshire Water, I'm not speaking for them obviously, but they're a privatised utility, but they're finding more and more that to deliver their services effectively, I think they need to view themselves as a kind of hybridized organisation. They depend on partnerships to be innovative and to be unusual, or even just to be effective and efficient. And the place-based elements of that are really strong, and I think that's why they're so central to our regional commission. If you look at green infrastructure, for example, it's hard to deliver joined up flood resilience and adaptation in an atomized way by one organization. You need to manage entire catchments, and you need to influence behavior of multiple actors across that catchment, and that's best done in a joined up way, and a commission is one way of facilitating and catalyzing that kind of behavior. I think the other aspect of utilities is that they are embedded in a place, whether that's in our case the gas networks or the electricity grid or the transport systems. They are inherently anchored in a local context or a regional context, and therefore one way or another, they're not going anywhere, whether they're privatized or whether they're nationalized or how they're regulated. They're still going to be part of the community moving forward, and therefore they have a different relationship with place maybe than some businesses which are more mobile or fluid or, you know, short-termist in their outlook. And I think that shows in the way that the Yorkshire and Humber Commission has evolved, and the input of those kind of organisations in leading change, and their reach beyond their direct assets. I mean, Yorkshire Water is, I think the second biggest landowner in the region, but their supply chains and their relationship with their customers and all of that kind of aspect means that they've got enormous opportunity to reach beyond their direct footprint and engage positively and catalyse change in a broader sense. And you know, going back to where I started, I think in their strategies looking forward, they're thinking, you know, we're not an isolated individual organisation that can live and thrive or not on our own merits. We need to engage, and we need to think of this in a much more partnership-based way, linked to the place, and that's why, you know, PCAN has a particular attraction for them, and commissions as well. So. Yeah.
Okay, any further comments from the panel, or John or Jamie?
Jamie, you go ahead, I'll come in after you.
So, I mean, I was just going to say a more distributed energy generation system is what we need for a lower carbon economy. So that changes, it definitely needs a change in ownership structure, whether it's all privatization, all nationalization or not, don't know. But, you know, it changes the role of the energy company in delivering that. You know, they're not just about the kind of business growth model of maximizing and increasing their generating capacity. They're about building in different ways of enabling that generating capacity to come to the grid, and then enabling that whether they own it or not. So it's a different model. John, go.
Well, this will not surprise people who know me and my politics, that, you know, I think nationalisation has certainly a lot of merits, particularly if you're of the view, and I'm not saying everyone would agree, that energy should be seen as a human right, not necessarily as a commodity if we look at the UN SDGs. And certainly there is an argument to say that energy should be seen as a natural monopoly. Now, whether that is compatible with certain parts of the system being privately owned is obviously, you know, for me a more technical question, but I have to agree with what both Andy and Jamie has said in terms of the advantage of at least having coordination and management, because that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the phased retirement of the fossil fuel sector and the transition then to a low carbon one. And it seems to me that it just in terms of parsimonious effective coordination, that's much better done by one or two or three agencies rather than by a plethora of public, private, you know, organisations. And I do think, though, that probably municipalisation is probably a better phrase rather than nationalisation, given that, you know, the types of low carbon energies, you know, absent of nuclear power, which to me, I don't consider as a low carbon if you look at the embedded carbon energy in the concrete use, and it's also very centralised. It doesn't lend itself to, you know, localised. For me, it is about looking at the structure of the ownership and control of the energy system. And there is some examples, you know, certainly in Germany, and it's very interesting state-led energy transition, or examples of low carbon municipal ownership and control in parts of Scandinavia. But I think that we're going to need a variety, a pluralist approach to see what works. But it just seems to me that given the urgency of the transition, we already hear coming out of COP today that the fossil fuel industry had the biggest delegation of 500 negotiators, bigger than any country. You know, the private sector is not always particularly the fossil fuel private sector is not our friend in this. So for me, you know, a response to that is not just low carbon, but to try a mixed, you know, model of ownership and control, which I think the technology now lends us, you know, to see that ordinary farmers, ordinary communities and citizens can see as we make and rise to this challenge that they can get direct benefit. And again, I'm only speaking in a personal capacity, not as co-chair of the commission or indeed on behalf of my PCAN colleagues. I personally am not particularly enthused by the model of transition that we transition from a private corporate fossil fuel energy system to a private corporate owned renewable energy system, because we can actually change quite a lot in democratizing, distributing the benefits of the energy transition that more of our ordinary citizens and communities can benefit. But then that's very clearly a political, ideological or normative judgment. But I do think it also stacks up just in terms of the efficiency of managing the transition. It's much better, in my view, to have a more centralized, coordinated approach than a distributed approach, which I think would be quite difficult to manage, and also it allows too many opportunities of those who are against the transition, opportunities for them to block.
Okay, thank you very much. I think just conscious of the time here, so I think it remains me just to thank our speakers and panelists today for, I think, what was very interesting and very challenging discussion. No doubt it will continue elsewhere and for a long time. One thing maybe I ask you to do, if you wouldn't mind, on your chairs, you see an evaluation form. If you have a moment, please just fill that in. It does help us to continue, this event in the future and report back on good things that we're doing. So, everyone, again, thank you very much for attending. And just to remind you, the website for the festival, which is reactfestival.co.uk. There's a number of other events the rest of the week. And if you haven't already, I encourage you to book onto those as well. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone. Bye. Thank you, panelists.